everybody for coming. So I'm sure that you all know our presenter for today is Dr. Mehrdad. He is professor of Middle Eastern, North African, and Central Asian history, and the director of the Central and Southwest Asian Studies Center at the University of Montana. He received his PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and after completing his degree, he taught at the University of Wisconsin, Cornell College, before coming to the University of Montana in 1989. His field of expertise is the political, cultural, and intellectual history of Iran, the Ottoman Empire, and Central Asia during the 19th and early 20th century. He has published 3 books as well as numerous articles and book reviews in his field. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Kia.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm coming from this sort of series of lectures, and the last one was in Great Falls. And what Brian is doing right now is bringing it up, basically. But in the difference between this presentation and the previous presentations is that those were much more broad and much more sort of regional. And this one, I thought we sort of focus on a country which has been in the news quite a bit. And there is always a possibility, you never know these days, of war igniting. And I thought Iran might be a good opening to this discussion, and then I would be more than happy to address any questions you may have about other parts of this so-called Islamic world. So as I always start by talking about this part of the world is that, you know, whenever we talk about Islamic world and so on and so forth, there are certain images which conjure up in the minds of the majority of Americans. And some of this is byproduct of Hollywood, some of it is byproduct of the media, some of it is just a byproduct of being in a long way away from that part of the world. And some of these images are usually, you know, desert, camels, oil, terrorists, you know, those are the kinds of things that conjure up in our minds. And of course with Iran, especially after the 79 revolution, those have been reinforced by even uglier images. It's not only kind of a vast desert with a lot of camels and oil, it also have nasty people who run the show in the country. And they are very dangerous, not only to their own country, but to the security of the world. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the country first and foremost, and then move forward. So let's move forward. You remember the image before 1979 was this man, His Imperial Majesty, Shahanshah. He was never referred to in Iran as Shah. He was the king of kings in Iran, the Shah of all Shahs. I don't know who the other Shahs were, but he was the Shah of the other Shahs. And his lovely Empress Farah, his queen, who was actually his 3rd wife. He had married twice in the past, not to mention, of course, he had numerous affairs on the side, but that's for some other, maybe a more sort of hot issue presentation in terms of personal issues. But these two ruled the country, and the Shah had been there since 1941, when Soviet and British troops had invaded Iran and had ousted his father, who had sided with Hitler and Mussolini. When they ousted him, the 21-year-old came to the throne and was only overthrown in February of 1979. I happened to be in Iran 3 times during that year when the revolution took place. I was there in the summer of 1978 until September, when I had to come back because I had to go to university. I was a student and I didn't want to lose my American visa. Then as soon as I took my exams, I went back in late November, early December of 78. And then I was there when the revolution took place and ousted the Shah. And I have to tell you one thing, because there are all these romantic images of revolutions, I noticed my mother was watching the movie Reds with Warren Beatty and Diane Keaton, celebrating the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917. There is a kind of a love affair with these kinds of events. Revolutions are actually very nasty things. They're ugly things. They're violent things. And to be honest with you, Iranian Revolution was relatively peaceful in the beginning. It was marches and boycotts and strikes, and I was all over the place just watching this. And people kept on calling from the United States, "Are you crazy? You're actually getting stuck." And I said, "How many times in your life can you watch a revolution unfold in front of your eyes?" Yeah, a bit crazy and a bit not, but I just don't want to lose the opportunity. So I was there when in January of 1979, the Shah announced that he had to depart Iran because of health reasons, and everybody laughed at him because they thought he was just being pushed out. But in fact, he was fighting terminal cancer. He was dying. He was a dying man. And a large part of his decision to leave, now we understand, was basically because of that personal reason, because of his health. He left Iran on January 16th, and then he went to Egypt to his very good friend, President Sadat of Egypt. From there, he went to Morocco, another good friend, King Hassan of Morocco. And then from there, he became a refugee. He was flying from one place to another until he ended up in a hospital in New York. And at that point, it was when our embassy was seized in Iran, and all of you remember those 444 days when Walter Cronkite would finish his news by saying, "Day 57 of hostages held in Iran." And by then, I had returned to this country, and I had to face a very interesting sort of set of things coming to me. On the one hand, they were always say, "Where are you from?" "Iran." "Oh, Iranian." "No, it's Iran, it's not Iran. I didn't run anywhere. It's just the name of the country is Iran." And secondly, "So what's happening there? Can you give a talk? Can you give a talk?" Of course. And then being in Wisconsin at the time, as the introduction suggested, you also had to deal with another set of issues. And that is the general ignorance of the public. I never forget coming back from the library one night, having bought some food and studying late. And suddenly, and we were, what, 8, 9 friends, we are surrounded with these guys on motorcycles, chains and knives and so on and so forth. And they said, "Hey, Arab, go back to where you have come from." And, at that point, these guys, I don't know what they're on, how much they have had to drink, what they have smoked or whatever. But you cannot say, "Hey, idiot, excuse me, first of all, we are not Arabs." And first of all, the word is Arab. Second, the Iranians are not Arabs. They're completely non-Arab. The word Iran, in fact, if you want to put it in the real context, we don't use that word. Aryan means the land of the Aryan people. They're Indo-European people. Their language, Persian, is within the family of European languages. And secondly, this is my home. I don't have any place to go. I am a resident and citizen of the United States of America. I just happen to look different from you. But of course, you cannot educate the guy who's coming to you with chain and knives. So all you can do is use your brown or black belt at that point to defend yourself. And I don't want to go into, what happened because it's too dramatic. But only a few days later, when an Iranian girl who had lost his father and brother to the execution, to the death squads of Khomeini, was going to class and turned on the elevator, it said, "Rape an Iranian woman today." And so she goes and brings a bucket of water with a sponge to clean it. And of course, this guy, apparently a big guy, comes and says, "What's the matter? I agree with this slogan. You should keep it." And they get into a fight. Police shows up. It was a mess. And here I am in Madison, Wisconsin, the Berkeley of Midwest, right? The joke was the liberated zone in the Midwest, you know, the red zone, the Marxist zone, the leftist zone. And look at the level of ignorance to the point that they actually, very humanitarian, extremely kind folks in Madison, Wisconsin, they actually found secret shelters for Iranians in town to hide in case they were attacked. So that's what ignorance does usually. And from then on, the reason I am presenting is sort of deal with these issues. So before we get so hot-headed, you know, those guys marching on the US flag and burning the Israeli flag, and here sport broadcaster burned the Iranian flag and demanded that the hostages be released. And funny, not funny, haha, but funny it is not now, we find out 444 days later that this was all a setup, basically. It had nothing to do with hostages. Hostages were just a small piece of this game. The reason for the hostages to be held is for Iran, or the new regime, the Khomeini regime, to push the liberals out, to destroy the left in Iran. During that 444 days, 35,000 Iranians were executed. So you understand what happened under the banner of anti-American, anti-imperialist, you know, marches and so on and so forth. And it was fascinating because there were 2 women among the hostages, among the US American hostages. And when they were released, of course they came, and you know, the first question from Dan Rather, CBS at the time, it was, what did they do to you? You know, it's always, you know, they're men and they're, you know. And she said, oh, something very bad happened. He said, what is it, what is it? And he said, I gained a lot of weight. You know? And Dan was, you know, flabbergasted. That was not the answer he expected. And he said, why did you gain a lot of weight? He said, they fed me so much good Persian food, you know, that, and we didn't have much time or place to exercise. So, and of course, he said, but there was another disturbing fact. And he said, what is it? Again, he said, well, every night we could count, they were executing 300 to 350 Iranians next door. And as if this was absolutely irrelevant to the reality of Iran, he said, well, are you happy to be back? 350 people per night? That's not news for you, because they are not Americans, right? So who cares? They're Democrats or conservatives or leftists or Marxists. So they're killed. And this is the crazy thing among them. And from that point on, I decided we need to talk about these things to not repeat these kinds of mistakes and misunderstandings. So that's why we are here now and talking about this society. I was born and raised in Tehran, and I was there until I was 17 years old when I came to US to go to the university. Tehran is a city today of roughly between 12 to 14 million people. So just the population of the city is larger than Sweden. I mean, the entire country. That gives you a certain sense. Tehran has 38 mayors. So in the city council, it's not members of the city council, it's mayors from all over, all the districts and so on and so forth. I come from kind of the right smack in the middle of the city, so I'm a city boy, and we can, go and it is the largest city of the country, in the country. The country has 75 million total. So you see that the incredible number concentrated in the capital city. It is the administrative center, it's the political center, it's the cultural and intellectual center. But of course there are at least 15 other over 1.5 million, 2 million cities with significant, economic importance, but they cannot replace Tehran. Tehran has an importance. And today, as we speak, in fact, news for you, the most latest update, the Iranian government has now voted to build a new capital because Tehran has become unmanageable, basically, in terms of traffic, in terms of pollution. It has come to a point that they are now dividing license plates. So if your license plate starts from 1 to 8, you can drive your car Tuesdays and Thursdays. That's the level of pollution and traffic jams and issues. And a lot of people in Tehran now have developed respiratory problems. You know, these are all the results of massive urbanization without planning, without consideration for environmental impact and so on and so forth. This is when you don't have a capital city, you have a megapolis, which is out of control. Also, Iran has something very, very interesting, and that is 70% of its population today is below 30 years old. It is one of the youngest populations in the world. Although, I have to say, they actually went into action and they implemented a highly efficient program of population control. And the result have been that this year, the population rate increase has become flat, right? So in the last several years, it has been declining. Nevertheless, the government is extremely worried about a population which is very young, very energetic, very restless, very demanding, and at the same time, very angry and alienated. And especially if you live under a highly authoritarian, and according to some, a totalitarian system, politically, and you cannot speak or organize, politically it becomes a ticking bomb. And that bomb went off, as I shall talk about it, in 2009, as some of you remember probably, when only in Tehran 2.5 million Iranians came to the streets demanding the overthrow of the government. So the youth factor is huge. There is another factor, and if we can move forward, and that is the gender factor in Iranian population. It's immensely important. Iran is not an Arab country. It has a very, and I would not say funny, but it has a very problematic relationship with Islam. Iranians have a history of nearly 2,500 years, recorded history, which starts with the ancient Persian empires of the past, and you have read about them probably, if you have read Herodotus and Xenophon and so Persian-Greek wars and so on and so forth. It dates back to Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire, who is mentioned, by the way, in Old Testament as the liberator of the Jews. He's actually the only non-Jewish person, non-Hebrew person, to have been given the honor of being the God's anointed, the Lord's Messiah, in fact, for going to Babylon, liberating the Jews, and allowing the Jews to return to Jerusalem to rebuild their temple, which had been destroyed by Babylonians. So from that tradition, and coming all the way to roughly the year 650 or so AD, when Islam comes, there is a huge, long Persian-Iranian history before Islam. And then Islam comes, but Islam comes from Arabia, right? So it brings an alien language, it brings an alien holy book, it brings a prophet who is not Persian, who is an Arab, Muhammad. And since then, the Iranian soul is very divided. On the one hand, it has an amazing love affair with its Persian past, its pre-Islamic past. Then there are a lot of Persians who consider that part of their history, which is Islamic, as being alien and imposed on them by foreign people. And the greatest poet of Iran, Ferdowsi, who wrote the epic poet, the Book of Kings, 60,000 poetical couplets, actually ends his book, this is 1000 AD, with the line, "Those who ate lizard's meat and drank camel's milk came and gave you a religion. Spit on the world, spit on your fate." That is reference to the Arabs. And if it couldn't be more anti-Arab and racist, it tells you where the identity breaks down between the Arabs and the Persians in terms of language, ethnicity, but also history and identity, which is very important. In this history, the role of women is very central. Iran has had women emperors in its Persian past, at least 3 of them, which we know. And women have always played a very central role. Therefore, I always tell my classes, this is not Saudi Arabia. Women have had 2,500 years of participation in the society. And today, out of this youth bulge, 57% of all university graduates are women. And though they are considered to be sort of under the gaze of the government and very much targeted through discriminatory rules and laws. They refuse to go away. And the result of this is that Iranian parliament, even this rubber stamp parliament, which is completely non-democratic, has a lot of women sitting in the parliament. The cabinet has a woman vice president and several women ministers and so on and so forth. And then, of course, there's always Islamic dress, Islamic dress. But look how they go around it, right? I'm completely covered. What's wrong with this? And they come. And there was a huge debate. Should we allow rollerblading for women? And then when tens of thousands of women registered and dressed up and said, can you see anything? I cannot see anything. Let's do it. Let's go to the next one, please, Brian. And this also, you know, you can't see me. You cannot see my body. So what's going on? And finally, the government said, but it's not becoming of women to behave like this. It actually made it more popular. So more women, go ahead. Yeah. Yeah. Next one, yeah. And then, I mean, there are certain things, you know, archery is a huge thing in Iranian culture. A lot of Iranians learn it when they're kids. You know, it's an ancient Persian, like polo, like chess, and so on. These are all goes back to the Persian history. So, and then this one. This is the most popular sport. And the reason for that is Iran is a highly mountainous country. And I always go back to the last one, please, Brian, thank you. This is actually close to our house, you know, to where I used to live. And my uncle had a small cabin, so I was right here every weekend. It's called Dezin, D-E-Z-I-N, for those of you who are interested. There are 4 or 5 ski resorts surrounding Tehran. And I always showed these photos, and everybody said, aha, you're showing Colorado now to fake it that this is Iran. It's a very cold country. That's why camels, you know, cannot really preserve themselves in this kind of cold climate. And what you see in the background, that peak, is Mont Damavand, D-A-M-A-V-A-N-D, which is a silent volcano. You can see it from anywhere in Tehran. This is about 45 kilometers out of Tehran. It's a very popular, there is also Shemshak, Ab Ali, there is a lot of ski resorts. And next one, please, Brian. And of course, this also creates the opportunity to do things without worrying about the moral police, right? And also, you're pretty covered, right? And you know, the moral police, they have one major defect. They're terrible athletic people. And they will never come and bother you on top of a mountain or skiing down or going for cross country. So you can beat them by having fun where they cannot make it. And they're not trained to be there. And of course, it's a golden opportunity to intermix, for men and women to intermix without worrying about moral police watching you. Yeah. And of course, this has also created a sort of subculture of young people getting out of town, getting fresh air, and also enjoying themselves. I come originally, my family comes from northern Iran, which is the Caspian sort of shore. And this is a very unique part of Iran because there is a lot of fishing, there is not a lot of rowing, there is a lot of swimming and so on and so forth. And the entire country moves north during spring and summer seasons for vacation. The north basically extends from one side of the Caspian to the other, which is about 12 hours drive, you know, from one side to the next. And it starts basically on the eastern part in Central Asia. Iran is a neighbor of Turkmenistan, you know, one of the Istans in Central Asia. And it goes all the way to the Caucasus, which is Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia on the other side. So it's a large area. And it's called Caspian Sea, but in fact it's a lake. It's the largest lake in the world. And because of its size, it is called a sea. The second Iranian export goes from the Caspian. And after oil, it's caviar. So caviar comes from the Caspian and is very popular in Iran and outside, and it's a major export item for Iranians. Northern Iran is also very lush. And Iran is blessed, unlike many Middle Eastern countries, with a high density and quality of wildlife. Until the beginning of the 20th century, Iran had a very unique species called the Asiatic lion. It was hunted out of existence, which is a shame. Until 1960s, I remember it very well, the Caspian provinces also had tigers, which were hunted to extinction. But still, leopards, bears, all variations of deer. It's an incredible country in terms of animal selection. And of course, the lush areas of the country allows the preservation of these animal families. Yes. But more and more, I think, and this is what is unique about this generation. It wasn't unique about our generation. We were completely ignorant of these issues. Is that I think the younger Iranians are becoming much more aware of how unique and how precious what they have is. The water, the soil, the air, the environment in which they live. And they have organized themselves. And these are places where the government, despite all its insecurity and paranoia, cannot stop them, because their cause is preserving clean water, right? But they're organizing themselves around these issues, because you cannot organize yourself openly, politically, against the state. So the preservation of Caspian, for example, is a huge cause for environmentalists, for the green movement in Iran, to mobilize the youth. And what is very impressive is that Iranian women played a leading role in organizing this movement. And that's a very, very interesting factor which cannot be ignored. Iran is also a very ancient country. And it's fascinating because you're going, and I was actually driving with a group of Americans in 1970s one time. We are going from Tehran to central Iran, Isfahan, and then from Isfahan to Shiraz. And the driver is talking very good English and so on and so forth. And the American fellow next to him said, "What was that?" He said, "Nothing, it was just a, ancient Persian Achaemenid temple." It's as if it's nothing. We have so many of these temples. And I told him, I said, look, if there was such a temple anywhere else, people would stop, allow the visitors to go now. And this is the ziggurat of Chogha-Zambil, which is nearly over 3,000, it's 1250 BC. It's a huge temple mound. And there are incredible excavations. The next one, please, Brian. And of course, Persepolis, Greek name for this magnificent archaeological ruins. Persepolis in Greek means the city of the Persians, right? Persian police, city of the Persians, is one of the most incredible archaeological remains of ancient times, period. And some of it is completely destroyed. 25–30% of it has remained intact, and it's in southern Iran. But one thing I want to emphasize is that this country is uniquely diverse, ethnically, religiously, linguistically. And one of its diversities is represented by religious communities which live in Iran. Iran has the largest Jewish community in the Middle East, in the world, after Israel. And this is a very important factor. So when Iran and Israel are constantly, threatening each other, one factor that the media is, of course, ignorant of is that there are so many Iranian Jews who travel to Israel but who live in Iran. The city of Tehran, Shiraz, these are all cities with large Jewish communities. And I was blessed to have a large group of Iranian Jews as my classmates, so I can testify to the fact. And going to a synagogue, interacting with Iranian Jews, and this was what it was before 1979. You never knew who was what until they didn't show up during a holiday, right? If they didn't show up for Christmas, they were Christian. If they didn't show up for Yom Kippur, they were Jewish, and so on and so forth. Next, please. And of course, Iran has a very large Christian population and belonging to different denominations: Protestant, Catholics, Orthodox, and Armenians are a very large population in Iran. And in fact, they have a soccer team, Ararat, which is named after Mount Ararat. And I never forget, Iran was playing Israel for soccer championship, Asian soccer championship. I was still going to high school. And of course, the Iranian national team came during the halftime. They were all prayed for victory. And they were given this traditional blessing that they should kiss something holy to sort of hope for the victory against the opponent, which was Israel at that time. And of course, the captain of Iranian national team, Karo Hakverdian, was Armenian, right? And when he kissed it, the entire population went nuts, all the audience. This shows Armenian and Iranian identity are very closely allied. And today, with Armenia, independent Armenia, just north of Iran, fighting for its independence, Iranians are very much closely allied with Armenia because this historical cultural tradition needs to be preserved. And this is an interesting facet of Iranian culture and religious life. So you see Santa Claus in Iran quite often, in fact. And I had a photo a long time ago. I'm with a Santa Claus, and he said, "Where are you?" I said, "Tehran." He said, "No. I just don't joke around." I said, "No, we have Santa Claus, I swear to you." So a lot of, Christmas holiday season. But let's go to the reality of the politics, and I will wrap it up with this. This diversity, this youthfulness, this highly educated population was boiling, for change. And the first element of change came in 1997, May of 1997, when Iranians went to an election which brought a reasonable result. They brought to power this guy, Mr. Khatami, as the president of Iran. He promised rule of law. He promised equality between men and women. He promised the democratization of the political system. But from the moment he came to power till he was forced out of power, they destroyed his government. They undermined his government. He was under threat of being expelled by the supreme religious leader, who is Ayatollah Khamenei. And this is the problem with Iranian political system. The president is elected, but the supreme leader is selected. And the supreme leader was handpicked by Khomeini before he died in 1989. So the supreme leader can veto the president at any time. So in 2009, after decades of this back and forth, the government decided to loosen up a little bit and allow for some candidates to run. And it was fascinating because I speak to Iran all the time, every week, at least 4 or 5 times. And I was asking people in Iran, so what do you think? Who are you going to vote? And they said, no, vote. We're not going to vote, and so on and so forth. Until this guy, his name was Mousavi, Mir Hossein Mousavi, a former prime minister, an artist, very popular because his wife is a leading feminist and woman organizer and a writer, decided to run. Then excitement began. And then the Iranian government announced that we are going to have open TV debates, just like in the United States. So every night, 2 candidates will debate, right? And the other candidates were not taken seriously until there was Ahmadinejad, who wanted to be re-elected, hated and despised by majority of Iranians. And then Mr. Mousavi. And I decided to watch this, right? And it's fascinating. It was broadcasted entire world. If you had a good computer, you could go on and so on and so forth. And it started with this very nice Persian niceties. How are you? You look good, you know. Thank you for being here and so on and so forth. And then in about 5 or 10 minutes, it started getting a bit nasty. And suddenly, Mousavi turns and just addressing Ahmadinejad as if we are addressing each other right here. He says, and there is the moderator sitting there and says, what is this nonsense? Denying Holocaust. What an embarrassment. You know, we all know it happened. Why are you doing this? Iranians are not Arabs. Why are you embarrassing Iran? Why are you targeting Israel? And then you go and hold the hands of that reactionary Saudi king. You know, it's an embarrassment. Wow. And Ahmadinejad suddenly, ooh, I got hit. You know, you could feel it in his face. And then he said, and look, I have some numbers for you. I would like you to comment. 6 million unemployed, 800% inflation, so many young people unemployed, so many educated people out of the job market, despair, alienation, hopelessness. This is a rich country. This is an ancient country. This is a proud country. It has to be a world power. What have you done to it? Ahmadinejad. By then, and I noticed as he was talking, there was a blue file, right? And it was here, and it started moving like this. He was moving it with his finger. And of course, the color blue and a file is a very bad thing in Iranian political culture. It's a security file, right? And as soon as Mousavi ended, he said, now I tell you, suddenly the voice became the thuggish Ahmadinejad that everybody knows, right? That nicety just went out. He said, now I tell you, you have embarrassed me. But I tell you who is feeding you all this nonsense. It's that woman who sits next to you. It's that woman who gives all those ideas. And we have checked, which means my security, intelligence. Her BA is fake, her MA is fake, her PhD is fake. She is this feminist, activist, radical. Wow, attack on Mousavi's wife. Right? Ridiculing her and her education. And he couldn't be contained. The moderator kept on saying, Mr. Ahmadinejad, your time is up. No, I'm not finished. You know, he's a very thuggish character. And finally, he ran out of gas. So, and I don't know by plan or what, the camera is right there. Camera came straight on Mousavi, then went to the left, just focused on him. And he just looked at the camera as if he's talking to you. And he said, that's why I'm running. This guy just defamed a leading Iranian woman, and she has no right to defend herself. And God, my phone started ringing. We are voting, we are voting. This thug has to be taught a lesson. You cannot speak like this, you cannot attack. People who were so skeptical about voting after that TV debate became convinced that they have to participate. The result was the election of 2009. And the result of that election, incredibly, was agreed by all parties to not be announced until all ballots had been counted, all boxes had been opened, so on and so forth. So we have a very short sort of piece, which shows, if you can go on to the next, in fact, this green movement. Why green, by the way, is because each candidate had to choose a color to represent his campaign. And when they were deciding, suddenly a green ball came to Mousavi. And everybody started clapping, because the green is the color of the Iranian youth movement and the environmentalist movement. And they love the fact that by chance, he, the one who wants to change the system, also got the color green. And there was an applause for 3-4 minutes. So we have a short piece which tells us now what happened. The Electoral College headquarters goes to Mousavi's house. And we hear them, actually, Mr. Mousavi, congratulations, you have won the elections. And we are here to ask you how you wish this victory to be announced, by radio, by TV, by us announcing, by you speaking, and so on and so on. And as they are talking, suddenly the doors are smashed and armed guards, you can tell, revolutionary guards, storm into the house. They start unplugging things. Is that the result of the election has been decided. His Holiness, which means the Supreme Leader Khamenei, has decided Mr. Ahmadinejad is victorious. Boom, 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 disconnected. And the last sentence you hear is somebody saying, this is a military coup. This is unconstitutional. And boom, it just goes dark. It was a military coup. It was actually a coup to prevent the Green Movement to seize power, right? And without even the Green Movement realizing how popular it was, the next day, the demonstrations with Mousavi's photo, a lot of people hiding their faces because they did not want to be photographed by intelligence forces. It says, my man is Mousavi. Next one, please. That's it? Yeah, okay. That's fine, let's keep it at that then. Was actually the moment, 2.5 million in Tehran, millions in other cities, and of course it was crushed. It was crushed by the most brutal force. And the biggest casualty of that uprising was a very, very young and fine and educated Iranian woman by the name of Neda. N-E-D-A. You probably remember Neda and her face coming. Even President Obama commented about her. She got hit by a bullet in her heart and she just collapsed and died. And from then on, the slogan of the Green Movement became, we are all Nedas. Neda became the symbol of the Iranian movement for change. Since then, of course, and I will wrap up with this, and I will shut up, so if you have any questions. Several things have happened. One is that the Obama administration, I think very wisely, instead of playing this discourse of we're going to come and get you kind of thing, it actually imposed a severe embargo on the Iranian regime. They couldn't invest, they couldn't buy, they couldn't sell, their oil was not sold. Because, look, the reality is this. If Iran sells its oil, the US oil companies buy it or others, they provide the regime with cash. That cash provides the regime with the ability to buy arms and repress its own regime. That oil is a curse, not only for us, but for the Iranian people, really, when you look at how it is circulated and how it is used. The second thing is that actually established direct contact with the Iranian opposition, both outside and inside Iran, which really frightened the regime. Because the first time the United States actually said, look, there is a democratic opposition, we want to establish contacts with this democratic opposition. And third, and this is very important, the banking system was hit very badly. Iranian currency dived in terms of value. The purchasing power of average Iranians also collapsed. Look, the last time I was in Iran, $1, 7 tuman, 7 Iranian currency. By 2011, 2012, $1, 3,500 tuman. It just, yeah, it lost its value completely. I was told for a pound of chicken, you had to pay $45. Tehran is very expensive anyway. You know, it just became impossible. So suddenly, they had another election, and out of a group of 6 or 7, initially 7 or 8 in fact, but they reduced the numbers, suddenly we have the smiley face of Mr. Rouhani coming out, right? Who reminds people of Khatami back in 1997. A British educated, very well spoken, smiley, sort of peace-loving man who is actually from the system all the way through. He worked in the Defense Department. He worked in the intelligence. So he is really not the genuine, Democrat, but he was brought as a means of saving the regime. And through him, they began the negotiations in which we are today. And why are they negotiating? Not because they believe in it. This regime does not believe in it. It's because they're forced to negotiate, because they want to prevent an attack on Iran, and they want to make sure that the economy would bounce back. I would, in fact, put the second one first. They're more worried about the economy and the eruption of people's anger and rage rather than the war. The war, actually, I have to tell you, is a very welcome news to this regime. And every time I have been given the chance to speak to anyone in Washington, whenever I've told them, do not go in that direction, because what Ahmadinejad, what Khamenei want is a US invasion. This regime will be rescued. The moment United States attacks, and Ahmadinejad kept on saying, bring it on, please, attack. Because the regime doesn't have anything. Democracy, non-existent. Economic solutions, non-existent. Popularity, gone through the dumps, basically. So what is it? What is left? It's, we are being attacked. We have to confront this enemy. And the other one is this so-called nuclear card, right? And let me finish by saying this. Despite all its unpopularity, this card is a hard one for this regime to lose. Why is that? Because it is the only card left on the table for a regime which is bankrupt, which is unpopular, which is hated. Why is it the only card? They always talk about this. They said, look, an ancient Persian nation, right? India has it, Pakistan has it, Israel has it. Why can't we have it, right? We want it, and we don't want it for militaristic reasons. Why do you want it? And they always laugh at this. They say, Americans say we are going to attack Israel. If we ever used it against Israel, we will be pulverized by United States and Israel. So why do we want it? Don't you remember 1980? Don't you remember when that fascist Saddam Hussein invaded Iran, right? For 8 years we had to defend ourselves. If we had the technology, if we had the bomb, he would never dare attacking us. And the second thing they use, fascinating, because they read the media and they know the world history very well, it says, look, former President George W. Bush talked about the axis of evil. Who were in that axis? North Korea, Iraq, and Iran. Who did United States attack? Iraq. Who didn't United States attack? North Korea. Why? One had the bomb, the other did not. If we had the bomb, we would not be bullied constantly by United States. We will be respected as a country. So it's preventive and defensive rather than offensive and aggressive. That's how they present it. And for those reasons, it's fascinating, though unpopular and hated, that argument lands very well with average Iranians. Even the most ardent opponents of this regime say, there is a logic in here. We're not going to ever use it. It's defensive, it's preventive, and it's to end this bullying. And Iranians are a proud and ancient people. Why shouldn't we have it? So with all that, I think I've talked enough, and I'll be happy to answer your question. The only sentence I would say at the end is, in these negotiations, you have to be very careful. You're talking with very devious, very astute, extremely dishonest characters. And you never remove the so-called military option, although I think it's suicidal. But at the same time, you do not give an inch until you get something in return. The majority of Iranians believe in having access to nuclear technology. The overwhelming majority of Iranians do not like the idea of having a bomb. They want this money to go into their economy, to their education, to their health services, and so on and so forth, which needs a lot of investing. So, I've talked enough. Thank you very much for your patience, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions you might have. And thank you, Brian, for supporting me. Questions? Any questions you may have? Don't hesitate. Please.
I talked to her.
Yeah, okay.
She's going to go to lunch with me.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
So
Yes.
give us a little preview of your class you're teaching in Mali on.
Oh, the Mali class. Yeah, thank you for reminding me. I have been trying to forget about it because it is such a gigantic task. It's called Women, Democracy, and Human Rights in Islam. And of course, Iran will be part of it. I thought, as you know, for a long time to come out and speak about my own feelings about the teachings of the Quran and the teachings of Islam, especially with regard to women. Many years ago, I wrote a series of articles about Iranian intellectuals who wrote about this issue in the 19th century and brought up this issue for the first time. They had to fear for their lives. And when I gave the article to the publisher, a lot of friends and colleagues told me, are you sure you want to do this? Because it has actually direct quotations from the Quran. It talks about Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam, and some of the controversy around his polygamy or polygamous practices, who these women were, what is veiling all about, whether veiling was prevalent at the time or it precedes Islam, and so on and so forth. And since those those articles actually allowed the journal to be sold out, I thought, you know, we can continue with that. But since then, I've received some warnings, so I have to really think about the security of myself and my family when we go into these kinds of very sensitive topics. But after a lot of agonizing, I decided that the time has come to really come out. You know, life is too short. You have to speak about issues that you are familiar with. So we're going to teach this class as objectively as possible, but I don't think if there are very devout Muslims, especially those who think about Islam not only as a religion, but as their politics. And I make a distinction between an average Muslim, Islam as a religion, and Islam as an ideology, especially those ideological characters. And they can become very furious and very upset very quickly. So I've been really agonizing over how to teach this class. But at one point, you have to forget about sensitivities and bring out what the truth is. And I hope that we can do that. That's why we have a university. Universities, at least theoretically, are places where you have to speak about these issues openly and freely. Yeah.
You mentioned the veiling there.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate a little bit on the origin of the veils?
Yeah, so,
Of the covering up?
yeah. My studies have shown that veiling has nothing to do with Islam. Veiling was prevalent. A lot of different communities, societies, cultures used veiling. Jews used veiling. Ancient Persians, you know, with all their respect for women's rights and all that, they actually practiced segregation in many cases. Though the queen and members of the royal family and women were everywhere. But in certain things, there were men and there were women, and they were veiling. And the Greeks did this. And certain Greek communities, Ionian communities in Asia Minor or Anatolia, and many others, Egyptians and so on and so forth. So veiling is not, and I think if we look at a Catholic nun, for example, you see that there are elements of veiling in every culture, every religion. But Islam made it almost legally prescribed, right? In terms of imposing it as almost a religious code. Now, my argument is if you go to the teachings of the Quran, it's actually a very mild, you know, statement that women should cover their, you know, sort of appearance in a way that can be interpreted that they should not be sexual objects, right? To be protected from the male sexual gaze, right? Rather than to force them into, you know, segregation or isolation. Yeah, to operate. But look, the reality is, all you need is an opening, right? Because the dynasties which were created after Muhammad's passing, of course, are all male-dominated, and they had a legal system, and they used these so-called statements in the Quran to actually push this through as complete segregation, complete veiling, and so on and so forth. And yet, despite all that, I will argue in this course that there are brilliant women all over the Islamic world, scientists, writers, poets, and so on and so forth. And in the case of non-Arab countries in particular, Turkey, Iran, and so on, so yeah, we really have a brilliant collection of some of the best intellectuals the Islamic world have created, have generated. So I want to sort of bring all this out. Whether I can do it in, 5, 6 weeks, and that's another issue. Yeah, 6 weeks, but we will give it a try and see what happens. But I think this is an important issue.
Wouldn't the veiling also be dependent on the availability of nicer material, like I'm thinking of China,
Yeah.
the silk,
Yeah.
and the Egyptian cotton?
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting because the ancient Arabs, did not have any much of textile industry, and in Arabia they were, not very covered. And there was just not availability, right, access to that kind of clothing. So that's one issue. But also I want to bring up the issue of polygamy, and this is a very important thing, because this is an obsession, of course. This last book on the Ottoman Empire, I was gathering material. And there's all these paintings. You go to a French museum, you go to a British museum of arts, there are all these harems, right? The woman is going like this, and there is a man lying on the bed and is surrounded by either half nude or nude women massaging him. And this is, of course, all sort of the imagination of Western artists. And this is the repressed imagination, right? They wanted this, but of course they projected it into a culture. Who would allow you to go to a harem to paint it? You would be killed before you entered the harem. So it's like these Hollywood films, right, we used to see, all these belly dancers going around, this little guy running around and surrounded by bodyguards and said, dance for me, baby, dance, And of course, it's more about the repressed imagination of Hollywood directors rather than the harem. So I started looking through those who had actually access to harems. And very interesting, a lot of them are German, Austrian, yeah, Habsburg actually, officials who paid in order to go. And the disappointment of European accounts of those who actually found access to, for example, Ottoman Empire, that, God, I thought this would be much more fun than where we are coming from. But nobody can afford having a harem. Harem was a very expensive thing to have, to actually have several wives, children from several, and therefore, as early as 16th century, the number of men in the entire Ottoman Empire who could afford a harem was 1%. So though, therefore, Quran allows polygamy, to practice it is something totally different. To actually have the financial ability. And it's very interesting also, the last sentence, is that over and over it says, and the men who do this are shunned, as being just sexually obsessed and showing off their male prowess and so on and so on. Therefore, it was a practice, but it was a practice among a very minute minority. Anyway, thank you so much for your patience.